The wind was biting cold that afternoon, the kind that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. At the corner of Maple Avenue, a small-town diner flickered with a worn-out neon sign that read, Betty's Place. Inside, 78-year-old Betty Harper wiped down the counter for the third time that hour. The lunch crowd had thinned long ago, leaving behind only the faint smell of coffee and bacon grease. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from exhaustion. Business had been bad for months, and today she realized she had only $10 left in her wallet. $10 to her name. Still, she smiled. Betty always smiled. Someone's got it worse than me, she'd say whenever neighbors offered pity. As she was closing up, the sound of a motorcycle engine sputtering caught her attention. A young man in a leather jacket coasted to a stop in front of her diner, pushing the heavy bike as smoke puffed from the exhaust. He looked lost and frustrated. Betty stepped outside, clutching her cardigan tighter. "Trouble?" she asked gently. The biker sighed, rubbing the back of his neck.
"Yeah, Mom.
Ran out of gas a few miles back. Phone's dead too. Guess I wasn't thinking straight." He was polite despite his rough appearance. Mud on his boots, tattoos running up his arms, a face worn from the road. Betty nodded, glancing back at the small cash register inside. $10, that's all she had. Enough for a loaf of bread and maybe a can of soup. But without a second thought, she reached into her pocket and handed him the crumpled bill. "There's a gas station 2 miles east," she said. "You can fill your tank and get home safe." The biker blinked, surprised. "I can't take that. You don't even know me." Betty smiled softly. "Honey, I don't need to know you to help you." After a moment, he accepted the money, promising to pay her back. She waved him off. "Just do something kind for someone else. That's how the world gets better." He drove off, the rumble of his bike fading into the dusk. Betty locked up, her stomach growling, but her heart strangely full. The next morning, Betty arrived at the diner early. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, humming softly, when she heard something unusual. The distant roar of engines. It grew louder. Dozens of motorcycles, their chrome glinting in the morning sun, rolled down Maple Avenue like a wave of thunder. Betty stepped outside, shielding her eyes as around 50 riders parked in front of her diner. The same young man from the night before stepped forward, his grin wide and eyes shining. "Morning, Miss Betty," he said. "Told you I'd pay you back." She blinked in confusion. "What in the world is all this?" He gestured to the crowd. "These are my brothers. We ride together, cross-state. When I told them what you did for me last night, they wanted to meet you. Turns out kindness travels fast." One of the riders handed her an envelope. Inside was a check, with her name on it. Betty's hands shook as she read the number. $25,000, the young man smiled. "We all chipped in. Thought you could use a little help keeping this place running. You gave your last $10 to a stranger. That kind of heart deserves something back." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she was speechless. "But why?" she whispered. The man's voice softened. "Because last night you reminded me of my mom. She passed a few years ago. Always said kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs courage." Betty's lips trembled as she hugged him. The other riders cheered, some wiping away tears. The sound of laughter and engines filled the small town as they spent the day at her diner, eating, sharing stories, filling the place with a joy it hadn't seen in years. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Betty stood by the window watching the riders leave, one by one. Her heart felt lighter than it had in decades. She whispered to herself, "Guess what goes around really does come around." From that day on, Betty's Place became a local legend. A diner where kindness brewed stronger than the coffee, and where people stopped not just to eat, but to remember what humanity still looked like. And every time a biker passed through Maple Avenue, they made sure to honk twice, once for the road, and once for the woman who gave her last $10 and changed 50 lives, including her own. Kindness costs little, but its returns can be beyond imagination. One small act of love can ripple across the world and find its way back to you when you least expect it. Weeks passed, and Betty's Place began to buzz with life again. Word had spread fast, not just around town, but far beyond. Travelers passing through would stop just to meet the woman whose $10 act of kindness had changed so many hearts. Some came to eat, some to talk, and others just to leave an envelope on her counter with a quiet note that said, "Thank you for reminding us that good people still exist." Betty couldn't believe it. The diner that had once struggled to make $50 a day was now packed almost every morning. The same coffee she'd served for decades suddenly tasted different, not because of a new recipe, but because every cup now carried a story, a connection, a reason to smile. One chilly morning, as snowflakes drifted softly outside, the doorbell jingled. Betty looked up and froze. It was the young biker again, the one who'd started it all. He walked in slowly, carrying something wrapped in a black cloth. Betty smiled warmly. "Well, if it isn't my favorite troublemaker. What brings you back, son?" He chuckled. "Wes, I owed you one more thing." He unwrapped the cloth carefully and set a small plaque on the counter. It was made of polished metal, engraved with the words, "In honor of Betty Harper, who gave her last $10 to remind us all what kindness looks like. Love, the Road Guardians." Betty ran her fingers across the engraving, her eyes misting. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to." He shook his head. "No, ma'am, we did, because what you did that night, it changed us. We started something new. Every month, our group picks a small town and helps someone in need. A struggling family, a veteran, a single mom. We call it the Betty Ride." She gasped softly. "The Betty Ride." He nodded, smiling. "Your kindness started a movement. You didn't just help a biker. You helped start a chain of hope across the country." Betty's eyes filled with tears. She reached over the counter and hugged him tightly. "You boys are gonna make this old heart burst," she whispered. From that day on, every year in early December, 50 or more riders from across the states would roll down Maple Avenue, engines rumbling in unison. They'd stop at Betty's place, share breakfast, and leave donations for local charities in her name. The whole town would line the streets, waving American flags, kids cheering as the bikers rode through.